Hello, boys and girls, and everyone out there who's tuned in to our Dandelion Reflections podcast, even today. And in this episode, we have a special guest. Caroline, hello to you first.
Hi, Christopher, and welcome to our guest, Dawn. Welcome. Hi,
Yes,
everyone. Christopher, I'll let you
You.
introduce our guest today.
right. Welcome, Dawn, to the Dandelion Reflections podcast. And you are a very, very natural guest in this space, I believe, because you are a real dandelion. But why don't you let our guests know a little about you yourself?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Well, my name is Dawn, obviously, and I'm a therapist working in Arizona currently, and I've had kind of an interesting journey. And we've known Christoph for quite a long time. I'm just meeting Caroline today, but and I'm delighted to be here. Um, and well, I've lived in the States, and then I lived in Ireland for quite a long time, for 16 years, and then I moved back to the States. But I've worked in psychotherapy for over 30 years, so quite a while. Yeah, long history, long journey. And I've just recently gotten my license again in Arizona. Long journey on that one. Um, but we're talking about narcissism today, and I think so I've had a lot of experience personally in my life with that as well as professionally, but definitely personal experience here. So yeah.
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, correct. We will um, talk about narcissism today, which is something that connects all three of us, our experiences with narcissistic partners. Uh, but, or not but before, yes, before, yes, before, yes, but um, before we go in there, um, I would like uh, you. Now, here's thank you, and I'm sorry for this. This is the what comes out of it not having scripted. I lost my thread right now. I thank you for your patience, all of you guys, and who's listening. Colleen, until
Yes,
I find my thread again,
I
why
will.
don't you take over?
I have absolutely a pleasure. I have questions for you, Don. So, narcissism is a broad term, right? So, how
Yeah.
would you introduce it to our audience today as a therapist? And basically, how do you want to weave that into our conversation? Why do we need to talk about that? And what is it?
I think that's a really good question. Because kind of narcissism is so overused, I think now too.
Mhm.
It's a term that gets brought up so many different ways. And there's so many different kinds of narcissists that we are discovering that are out there. And I suppose, why it's important, I suppose, is because in particularly in narcissistic abuse, the effects, and I suppose that's kind of maybe more the focus today, the effects of narcissistic abuse and effects of narcissism on relationships, um, has a profound impact on that's not the relationship, but on the person and the functioning of the person. And it can be so difficult to see. I know that was for me. Um, a therapist for 30 years, and I didn't see it in my own personal life. And I think it can be something that, like I said, we use the term quite a lot. We banter it around. It's become quite popular, term that's used a lot. But I don't think that the real understanding of what that is, what that means, um, and what it really looks like in a relationship. Um, and the impact that it really has in a relationship is really understood, especially when you're in it. I know that when I've worked with clients, I've often heard them talking about this person, that person, narcissistic, while they're right in the middle of a narcissistic relationship and narcissistic abuse and aren't seeing that for themselves in the relationship. And I know I was one of those people as well. So,
I've read somewhere an analogy that was so compelling and that spoke to me is narcissistic abuse is like carbon monoxide poisoning. You can't see it, can't smell it, but when you realize you've been poisoned, it's quite late. You can be very worn down and weak. And I must say, in my victims that I worked with, or my survivors are my victims, but my people I worked with who are victims or identified as victims, it's from then that I learned the effect of narcissistic abuse. It's like indirectly, right? We see what it does to the victim, and that's when it comes, in full light, the narcissistic abuse, the victim's feeling numb, deflated, has low self-esteem. And that's what we see, but we don't see
yeah.
necessarily the bad energy coming out of the person. We see the effect so on the target. And I've learned a lot from my patients, so I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you have to say as well, as a clinician and as a therapist.
I think that's a really brilliant analogy as well, because just like that, when you come out of that, because you don't see it when you're in it, you don't know it, when you come out of it, and once it's cleared and you're got rid of the carbon monoxide, you see it so clear, and then you can see the effects that it had on you, but you couldn't when you were in there, and you didn't realize how subtle buildup and that same thing in the relationship. You can't really see, and even when people are telling you, you don't really see the effects that it's having because it's so slow over time. And I always kind of equate it to kind of the water on a stone, that it erodes slowly over time, and it erodes more and more the personality, and kind of like radiation, it gets into every part of you, and you don't realize until you're away from it and you have time away and you start to come back to yourself. And then you start to see how much you had lost of who you were. Um,
I'm
yeah.
sure was hearing that.
Yeah.
Christopher, what do you, reactions, thoughts?
I there's another common denominator for us three and many others out there that are suffering or have been survivors of a narcissistic relationship, and that is that they're often very empathetic persons. And I see this in both of you choosing this profession to help others early in your lives. And look at that. There we have these empathetic people that would love to help others. And suddenly there comes this person into our lives that we perceive as, oh, I can help you. Oh, I can fix this for you. And I understood from our many talks, Colin, and also with you, Don, that this is a common pattern, right?
Yes.
Very much. I think, it's funny because I think I've been talking a lot about codependency with clients, but also seeing that aspect in my own of that very thing of the empathy, but also that line that gets crossed of taking on. And I think that there's a very much a correlation sometimes with trauma backgrounds, where we also have that trauma history in our own backgrounds. Not always, but often. And so very empathetic people often have that need to want to make it okay for everybody, right? And
Right.
that's where the codependency of taking on, other people's feelings, trying to fix it, trying to make it okay. And that's, I think, what's the word? Um, that's how the narcissist really prey on the empathetic, right? That's the ground, because that's the perfect fit, right? They come in and I feed off that, and becomes a very toxic symbiotic
Yes.
situation. Does that make sense?
Does.
Absolutely. I see that there are two partners who are wounded in their own way from childhood trauma, neglect, misattunement. But one came out of that more empathetic, sensitized, and wanting to understand the other. And the other partner comes in identifying with the aggressor basically and replicating some trauma rather than developing that empathy and feeding off, like you said, the empathy. So basically, narcissistic abusers are energy vampires. They like the light that you shine, the empathy, the drive you have to help others. Also, because they can't have that, they can't develop or express that. But they think that by abusing, they will
Yeah.
appropriate it, but they wouldn't even know what to do with it. So basically, they try to destroy it because they can't
I,
stand seeing that in others.
and I think that that's the one thing that I hear often with my clients, is that very point right there. Like, why does this keep happening to me?
Mm.
Because that's the very thing. It's not their fault. I
No.
really want to be clear about that. It's not, but because that's the part, that empathy, that part of ourselves that keeps giving, that's
Right.
what they're drawn to, right? And so that's
Yeah.
why it keeps happening, because we're not aware of our boundaries, and even when we are, that part that keeps replicating. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, because empathetic people cannot conceive that others would do that, right? We
Right.
always give the benefit of the doubt, give another chance. Oh, this person must be suffering to do this, but of course,
Right.
but eventually we realize they don't take ownership and they keep doing that. And yeah, we have to protect our boundaries. And it's a tough
Yeah.
realization. It's a disillusionment, but it needs to happen.
Yeah. I know in,
I,
in my own situation, oh, sorry.
no, no, go on.
I know in my own situation, I kept giving the benefit of the doubt. I kept looking at what I was seeing and the trauma the person had had, and understanding and looking at it and thinking I was seeing PTSD, and really giving the benefit of the doubt and that, and making allowances, leeway, giving, and disregarding little red flags that would come up as, no, no, that's not that. This is just struggling because of this, instead of listening to my gut. And I think that's sometimes what happens, right? And
Right.
yeah, and that's been the struggle, I think, we talked about before, of, as a therapist, I initially really beat myself up, and I think it was really difficult for me to recognize or even leave the situation, because I felt like I should have known. How could I be in this? Because I should have known. If this was what this was, I should know. I should have known better,
Mhm.
right?
So I, I can relate with that, Don, and I'm glad you bring this up. What do you tell people who say, well, it's because the person just picks the wrong partner? What would you say to these people, right? Because there's a major misconception about what those dynamics are. And it's very victim blaming, actually, when it takes away the focus from actually the perpetrator, right? So how do we navigate that? How do we respond to that? Because I've heard
I
that.
don't,
Well, you picked the wrong one.
I first of all, think that the person who's saying that is not in a place of very much empathy. But what I try to explain to them is that you don't understand the dynamics of how this works. It can happen to anybody,
Exactly.
um, because they're not in a very compassionate place if they're going to say something like that. But somebody who is actually experiencing it or is struggling to really understand, I do explain then in more detailed understanding of that, actually, that this is a pattern. This is a pattern that is more complex. It's not the wrong partner. It's not just picking the wrong partner. It's more complex than that. It's them, the person preying on compassion. It's actually preying on a really good trait in somebody, a really good compassion's a good thing. Compassion is something that's desirable, and
Mhm.
it's taking advantage of that. And that's not a bad thing to have compassion, but for the person who has the compassion, it's helping them to understand and to be able to recognize in themselves the patterns and to see what that is. Do you know that
Mm.
that's a really difficult thing because it comes in so many different forms, so many
Yes.
different forms. It doesn't look the same way twice. So,
Mm.
It's so interesting to listen to both of you, and with your professional background. Um, and I could sit here for hours, uh, and I I get this memory flashbacks from the beginning of these. I, I think I could say I've been in two of such relationships, and I now, with the knowledge I have today, I see these my ex-partners telling me about these horrible experiences in their childhood, and then even the second time, I thought, oh well, this is a warning signal. I thought in number two, and then I didn't. I saw it, but I didn't. Right? I still went in there. I still wanted to help. I still wanted to, and it's and I really feel it. I could beat up myself day in and day out, but I'm not. And the second thing I would like to throw into this round is the unbelievable intelligence that not all, but some of these narcissistic people have, that really is uh, keep keep track of whatever you have said at any given time, and they really uh, remember anything, and, and have this magical capability of dragging it up just at the right time out of the deepest
Mhm.
I don't know, a hole, and suddenly you're confronted and you feel so helpless and so in this role that oh it must be me, right? It is my fault,
Mhm.
that you actually believe it. It's unbelievable. So 2 points: um, warning signs, red flags, and the the time that we actually think it's our fault.
Mm.
Is What would you like to say about that, both of you?
there, there are so many different kinds of warning signs, you know, and I'll speak to some of the ones that I missed that I wish that I had seen. And some of them are ones I've read. They're are kind of, you know, the rush, the push for the relationship to move faster than was comfortable. Um, I remember there was a push to meet the children, and I was like, it wasn't comfortable. I felt that was too soon. Um, and I pushed back on that one, but I just remember there was a push, you know, I love you too soon, those kinds of things, you know.
Mhm.
Um, but even other things of the drama that happened very quickly. There was always a lot of drama, um, and crises. There were a lot of crises. And that again didn't spot that as a warning sign, but I should have, because it pulled me into the helping. Oh my gosh, this is awful. Okay, you know, brought me into not fixer, but compassion. Oh, this is awful. Of course, let me help you, you know. Um, but I didn't recognize that as a pattern until much later, that that was a recurrent. Anytime later on in the relationship, things got difficult, crises started happening. And that was a repeated. And I was like, then I got to see that, you know, oh, this person has cancer, that person's going, and they might have, but that was already going on. But suddenly this was an issue that needed to be suddenly introduced into, this is a crisis, and it wasn't a crisis before, even though they already knew about this for a long time, you know. Um, I started catching on to what was happening, but it took me a long time. That was many years down the road. Um, those are difficult ones to catch. Do you know that isn't necessarily a classic red warning sign, but that was something that I started to see. The gaslighting. The gaslighting is a big one, and that is a hard one, but trusting your gut. Trusting your gut. I can't say that more strongly. So I dismissed things that I wish I didn't dismiss. And we do that, I think. They wouldn't lie to us. He wouldn't do that or she wouldn't do that. And I want to make just a comment here. This happens in friendships as well. And we
Right.
dismiss that part too. And this does happen in friendships and in families. So just to make that comment as well, because we're talking about relationships, but
Thank you.
yeah. So that gaslighting is that big one. And in this relationship I'm talking about, it became really big in terms of the gaslight, but it started off really small, in little things that were just like, I thought we did this. No, I didn't. And I didn't trust my memory, and things I couldn't quite hold on to when we were down the road in marriage and um things moving, disappearing, and then reappearing, and can't find things, and then suddenly they're there, and that kind of like literal gaslighting going on. And as you said, things being thrown back at you, and so it escalates, So it starts small and it gets bigger, but trusting the gut. I wish I trust my because I felt it. I was like, I'm really sure that this happened. No, it didn't. Something feels off, but I didn't trust it. So that would be another big red flag. I'm trying to think of some of the others that aren't coming to mind right now. Caroline, can you think of some?
I mean, everything you said, Dawn, I can relate at the creation of conflict because I think narcissists do not tolerate positive emotions. So for me, every time I was having a good time, there was something that would happen. Yes, a drama, a crisis. The voice was raised at me. And oh, we're not going to have enough food for those guests. What are you talking about? There's an abundance. And then I suddenly would feel super sad about the event and feeling I was inadequate. And yes, the gaslighting and twisting reality, messing with your perceptions. And yeah, it's very insidious. And also I realized like when I was away, I felt so good. So that was also a sign that it's when I'm around this toxicity, this person who's so negative and trying to wear me down, that I feel the worst. I don't feel good about myself. But when I'm with others, I feel okay. My self-esteem's fine. I'm having a good time. So these were signs for me. And also the two faces, the flip, I would say, personalities, so to speak, like in one setting appears charming, likable, and behind closed doors, suddenly the expression was like so tense, hostile. And I was always thinking, what did I do wrong? Always. So you internalize the blame when it has nothing to do with you. But I didn't see that. And also I stopped trusting my intuition, my gut. I was questioned, well, you have to justify it. What do you mean? You said you think this, you feel this. So even having to justify how I felt and apologize for it, that was another warning sign that I ignored. Yeah.
But you said that too, that it's funny about that, about the feeling good when you're out with other people and not, and what was really interesting, I remember feeling like I had this little dark cloud hanging over me all the time. And I remember I always had a feel, my mother used to comment on it. Everything always seems to work out for you. And it used to irritate her, not in a bad way, but like, she used to joke about it. Like she would say, this is going to happen if you don't do this, like try to warn me to be careful. And then it would always work out for me. And I seemed to have good luck until I met this person. And I felt like my luck was draining. Like bad things started to happen, and not in a superstitious way, but I just felt like there was lots of negativity all the time. And like this little dark cloud was hanging around me, and it wasn't till I was out that I realized that little negative dark cloud was perception. It was how I was beginning to see the world. It was how
Right.
everything always seemed like it was from a negative point of view. Do you know that? And the isolation, that was the other flag that I would say is
Mhm.
more and more, not in the beginning realizing what was happening. It wasn't the classic turning people against you, I think I would have seen coming, right? But it was the subtle little things of this person is doing this and things that you could, and slowly moving people out of our lives, moving us physically away from people,
Mhm.
moving countries, you know, and then stories that would more and more isolate. And to the point then I ended up starting to isolate myself because I didn't feel
Ooh.
good. I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to talk about what was going on because I think I felt shame and I felt embarrassed and I felt didn't
Mhm.
want to say, I didn't know how to say, you know. So then it becomes self-isolation. So
Mhm.
those are things that I also early on, if I had spotted the isolation more, I think that would have been a red flag. But that was definitely one of the things.
Mhm.
And I could see myself pulling more and more and more away from my relationships, my friendships,
Right.
to where I wasn't doing anything except going to work, coming home,
And
Yeah.
friendships are
existing.
so important in such a
Mhm.
situation, right? And just someone from the outside. Well, given of course that we listen, sometimes we don't listen even to the best advice from good best friends. But still, it's so important to just find someone shining some reflective light onto ourselves.
Right.
And but then,
Mhm.
of course, that's what narcissists do, right? To
Mhm.
sabotage your friendships by any means, unfortunately.
I think the worst part of that is the internal sabotage. Do you know?
Mm.
It's because at that point, I don't think it was even external. It wasn't even contact with friends that
Mhm.
that person had with those friends. It was what I was doing, what
Mhm.
he was doing to me that I was doing to myself. Do you know?
Oh, right.
Of
Mm.
I had no, I was holding on. I felt like I was holding on. You know, I was just trying to get through, um, and I knew, but I remember for a period of time before that of just how do I fix this? What am I doing? What am I doing that's not working before I recognize what this was? What am I doing that's not working? Why is this not working? What am I doing that's wrong? Why is this not working? And so I kept trying to fix it before I
Mm.
recognized that this was a narcissistic. Once I realized that, I was just trying to hold on because I started to recognize what was going to happen when I left and what the damage was going to be to the situation. And I started to get really concerned. And so I was holding on, but there was
Right.
no capacity for anything more, you know? And
Mhm.
so, yeah, so there's a lot of damage. There's so much damage in
Mhm.
the isolation. And I didn't know how to reach out to, sounds so crazy for a therapist of 30 years to say this, right? But I didn't know how to reach out to anybody and talk about this
Mhm.
because it felt crazy to talk about. It felt, you know, I had no bruises. I had no broken bones. There was
Mhm.
no broken dishes, you know, that it
Yes.
felt crazy, you know?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
I understand completely. Yes. Very isolating experience because people don't talk about that. So we think everyone else is going well and we are the problem if things are not going well in our own relationship, right? So, and we also have sometimes, even as women, the pressure to make a relationship work. Often there's the burden on women to seek couples counseling or drag their partner. You know, it's been shown. Actually, there are some studies. So I think there is that extra component. but of course could apply to men too. But however, as a woman, I can tell you, even like the stigma of walking away from a marriage, it's always stronger, and weighs strongly on women, I find. And so we hesitate to make those drastic moves. And also we feel maybe extra vulnerable, and especially in the narcissistic abuse dynamic, and that could be also regardless of gender, narcissists will really try to get as much information about you as they can. And in my situation, it was like I had to say everything that's ever happened to me, and we have to share everything. There could not be secrets between us, right? That's a red flag right there. We don't have to share everything to be in an intimate relationship with someone. We don't have to share all the intimate details of our lives. But I didn't realize then that this was ammunition that he was gathering. And it's an intrusion of one's boundaries. Actually, there's no respect of boundaries with narcissists, right? What they see outside of them is theirs to take. So yeah, so we feel kind of naked and weakened and vulnerable, and it's even harder, yes, to step out of our isolation and seek help. So I can relate to that as well.
I'm really glad you mentioned that about the boundaries, because that's the other aspect I forgot about as well. And I don't know if that was the same in your situation, but for me, it was everything was his. All of mine was his, but his was not mine, right? So it was one way only, right? And
Correct.
if I were to use even a tool, it was World War III. How dare I? And and the information was one way as well. I was, in the beginning, I remember being like this, and I remember catching myself going, why am I afraid? Like asking for permission to leave the house, asking for permission. I was going, what is going on? This is crazy, and yet coming and going the other direction, no idea where he was going. But like I had no knowledge of finances. On the other end, I had no knowledge of accounts. I was locked out of, it was really extreme. There was a lot of financial abuse. I had no knowledge of lots of that end of things. And it was, but I was expected to disclose everything. And
right.
I did start standing up to that and going, no, if this isn't going to be two-way, then it's not going to be. So I did start finding some boundaries, along the way, but it was very interesting because there was, and this is one thing I wanted to comment on about the couples therapy. We did do couples therapy, and I think this is one thing with narcissistic abuse that some couples therapists are aware of, but I don't know that all are, and it can be very dangerous, if you're not careful, because it was just basically opportunity to try to dump on me. I was prepared for that, so I kind of knew that was probably what was going to happen, and it did. But those sessions were totally unproductive because it was just listing all of the things that were wrong with me and all the things that needed to change, and not the other direction, and not productive in addressing any of the real issues. And I think that can be what happens, so yeah.
That's how narcissistic people think, right? It can't be their fault, they're perfect. It's your fault. And if the therapist is not careful, they might be caught in that triangulation, siding with the partner who's abusive. And that's more damaging, because yes, then the partner has more ammunition, because we're vulnerable in therapy, right? We share everything. We want things to work. So we let our ego aside, and we're sharing about emotions and intimate materials, but that just gives more ammunition, and it gets weaponized against us. So yeah, they don't change. They don't really change, or we can't wait for that to change. for us to move on and protect those boundaries. And I found too that the boundaries, by setting them, because everything you mentioned, I can relate to that. It's like, I think it falls into the category of what we call now coercive control. So the abuse happens in various dimensions, not only so much physically anymore, because people are more like intolerant of physical abuse, but it happens emotionally, spiritually, financially. So there's the oppression happening on those levels. So I find that, at least for myself, when I started setting boundaries, there was retaliation and anger. It would generate anger if I dared having my own little bank account or wanting to have a bank account, right? Because everything had to be mixed, and no, everything that's yours is mine, even my time. So all the resources, my time, my ideas, everything would get appropriated, but it was not the other way around.
Yeah. I think, unfortunately, what happened for me, because I did start setting those boundaries too, of kind of pulling back and not reacting, not responding, not, just okay, just, and that was my, I started reading a lot about narcissistic abuse and not responding to the rages, the hooks, and just okay. Well, then what I discovered, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about this part, and whether I would do it differently, I don't know. But he was living away at this stage, working away, and was away more. So he would take the children away where he was going, where he was living. He was taking it out on them, and that became more of a, and so that is my regret, in one way. If there was another way, I don't know, but hindsight's 2020, right? But it certainly helped me to get healthier, but I didn't see that soon enough, but
well, it's part of the whole reality. Unfortunately, they are so powerful and controlling that they end up sometimes affecting the children. And we have the legal system really not aware of that enough to protect, unfortunately. And that's a whole other topic we might not have time to go in today, but it's like, even asking for help doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be effective. And I'm sure you did all you could, and at the time. So I feel like there are forces at play that are really creating obstacles, unfortunately. So I think it's important to realize that there might be consequences or repercussions on children and minors, and the society needs to be aware of that, because it needs to be a collective responsibility. Those kids can end up in our offices eventually, or our colleagues' offices, and they need to know that the reality of narcissistic abuse affects generations, partners, but children too. It can be transgenerational.
I think that's the part that is really difficult, is that is something that is still very lacking in our society and in our legal system, because I am seeing it in my work often, is that things are ordered that aren't really in the best interest of the children, and they're basing it off fairness, which I understand, but not really understanding the dynamics of this aspect and what really is at play. And it's really disconcerting, because
It is.
the children suffer, and I am seeing adult children, that have been through this, and through the legal system, with this, and things do need to change, and I think the legal system needs to be educated about this. So
instead, what they do, they give the children their own attorney, a minors counsel. Can you believe that? We're creating more layers of conflict, and the poor children are caught in the middle. And this is nonsense. They say, wise people say that we should do everything we can to leave a divorce out of the family court system. But often we don't have a choice, because if the ex is so conflictual like narcissists are, it's inevitable, but it's the legal and family court system, there needs to be some reform. And yeah.
No, there does. There absolutely does. And there has to be a better way. But you're right, because it's so conflictual, it's very difficult, I think, as well. But yeah.
So what would if we see these signals, or maybe not even see the signals, but get a hint of this could be something. There could be some smoke on the horizon.
Mhm.
Uh, well, starting from there, and let me just throw in again, there are narcissistic partners both in all genders,
Right.
and so here's the shame part. Also in all genders to step out and seek help,
Right.
and I think that many men uh, are are too ashamed. Also, women, of course. I don't want
Mhm.
to say that, but many men think they have to be strong and try to fight this on their own, and they well. However,
Mhm.
um, how can we step out? Do we need to find our allies somewhere outside, and do we have to? Dawn, you mentioned that not engage in discussions because we will always lose, but
Mhm.
build a secret uh, ally group outside of the knowledge of our narcissistic partner to then prepare for a quick drawback. Is
Mhm.
would that be something to focus on?
I I think building knowledge is really important. So understanding what's happening. I think I'm gonna speak to my journey, of the first time I listened to somebody talking about the dynamics of it, I was like, that's what this is. That's what's happening here.
Oh
Because I
well.
couldn't understand what was happening in my relationship. I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong.
Hmm.
Why I knew what a healthy relationship was supposed to look like, and I knew it wasn't healthy, but I couldn't figure out what I wasn't doing to get it to that point. Why I was taking that responsibility is another thing. But and then I listened to this talk, I can't even remember which one it was, describing, and I think the key one was, walking out in the middle of when you're in the middle of a conversation, throwing something out and then walking out where you can't even finish the conversation. And I was like, that was like the moment for me because that happened repeatedly where I could never, there was never a conversation ever finished because we'd start to
Mhm.
talk about something, he would say something and then walk out the door, and I never ever
Mhm.
had any conclusion to anything. Um, and that moment, and then all the other pieces, it was like, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not
Hmm.
crazy. That was
Mhm.
really validating. So
Well.
that I think that education piece really helped me knowing that I wasn't crazy, knowing that this was some I still had to repeat it over and over for a while. I had to keep going back and listening to it and listen to other things before, because then you kind of go back to, well, maybe, what if I'm wrong? What if maybe it is, I think that that's part of this dynamic, if questioning yourself, doubting yourself. Um, but then joining a support group or joining, and I think that's a hard step for some people. As you talk about with men, I'm also going
Mhm.
to talk about another group because I have a couple of clients, and what I'm thinking in particular, the LGBTQ community. I think it can be very difficult, and I saw for one person I worked with, it was very difficult to step outside. And no matter how much we talked about it, no matter how much I really tried to validate, it was very difficult for her to recognize this, you know, until it blew up. And so I think it can be very difficult in lots of different, ways, even when people are saying it, even when your friends are saying it, even when you have that validation. But when you have that support group, or you have that it still can be difficult to reach out to that. So, but once you recognize it, once you have that, tapping into that can be really vital. But accessing it, I think, can be a big step, a really difficult step, just from my personal experience.
Caroline.
Yeah, no, I want to echo that, Dawn and Christopher, like you said. Sometimes for men it might be there might be a pressure to stay, or there might be a shame component, right? But as we know, it happens to men and women, and in fact it happens to people who have good qualities, who are bright, successful, empathetic. And that's what we need to remind the survivors of, is it's just it has nothing to do with you or any defect you may have. It tells more about the abuser doing this. So we need to kind of normalize the experience of each victim so that they can step out head high from that relationship and not wait until it's too late, they're too worn down and depleted. And yes, support groups, I think, can help, because it can provide space where you break the sense of aloneness and you have a validation of your feelings. And it can happen to any gender at any age, and sometimes a repetition of times, right, or relationships, until we understand the pattern. Or, yeah, now I get it. It keeps happening because I didn't realize this was narcissistic abuse, whatever. So removing the shame, which is really an obstacle to recovery and empowerment. Yeah.
And finding
Second,
one's own, I'm sorry, go
no, go
ahead.
ahead.
Finding one's own superpowers. I know this is a strategy, of course, of taking those away from you, but realizing you you don't need to be in any relationship to survive. We
Mm-hmm.
are all so strong enough to step out, and things will fit. Things will work out if you. I remember I had very strong financial anxiety. What will happen if I leave this? I couldn't figure out a way, but eventually it went well. Of course, it will always work out, and there are people and organizations out there that will help. You you are never alone, and you guys mentioned the groups that help people to realize and make it work anyway. And so that's something that we really have to regain awareness of, that we are strong. We don't need this, especially not this partner. We don't need any partner to survive. Yes, it can be a little more difficult if there are kids involved, but eventually there's always a way, and nothing is big enough to that lets you need to continue this unhealthy relationship.
I I think that's really important for people to remember that part, because I think also that's often what the narcissistic abuser plays on, is those fears. You'll never make it on your own.
Right.
You'll never, nobody will ever want you. Nobody, you
Exactly.
know, mindset, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to make sure that you, and he's tried, but we're here. I can breathe, you know, I'm still
Exactly.
standing.
We
So,
are, yeah.
right. So I think it's those fears. And, I often tell my clients, and I really believe this, fear is just an emotion, and it can be very powerful, but it's just an emotion. They play on it and it seems really big, but it's just an emotion. And if we can move past, just feel it and move past it, we can be anything we can imagine, you know,
Exactly.
but
Wow.
that we can't let it control us. And I know I lived in fear for so long that I was in that. Um, and most of those fears never came to pass. Some of them did, but I survived them. They weren't as bad as I thought they were going to be. So,
Yeah,
you know,
wonderful.
You
so
must be a very good therapist, Dawn. I love hearing you say this. And also, Christopher, re-emphasizing that, yes, we are strong on our own. We don't need to be in a relationship to be fully ourselves and to thrive. But I think we're programmed by society, and I can speak for myself from an early age, to get married or to have a partnership because it somehow defines our value. That's not true. This is not true. And I think narcissists are successful still or effective at abusing victims because they know that. They know there's an insecurity in being single. But we need to shift that. We need to shift that paradigm. They won't be as effective once we figure out that we don't need to be in a relationship or stay in a relationship that no longer works for us, that is actually destructive. There won't be that pressure anymore.
Wow.
there was something that you said earlier, Carolyn, I want to come back to about that. Narcissists as well. And I remember reading this in the research. Narcissists also prey on it's our independence, but it's more than that too. They prey on strong individuals. They prey on what they see in you is what they want for themselves. And
Right.
so if we can remember that when they don't we think that they prey on us because we're weak, and that's not what it is. That's how sometimes we think about it, right? And
Right.
that's actually not the truth. The truth
Mhm.
is they see something in us they want for themselves,
Right.
and they find us usually at our strongest, and that's what they're wanting to take for themselves, and that's what they try to do. And
Yeah.
so that's what I forget sometimes when I try to remind people of when I'm talking to them.
Mhm.
They're in that is what they've been seeking, and that is what, because they don't, deep down,
You do.
uh, they don't have that in themselves. They are deeply insecure, deep
Yes.
down. We don't
Yes.
see that part of them, but that's what they're trying to take for themselves. And so most of the people who do end up in these relationships are amazing people, you
They
know?
want equal relationship. They don't want codependency, right? But it ends up being that
Exactly,
because of the narcissist insecurity. That's all consuming. Yeah.
exactly.
Thank you for that
So
nuance. Yes. Very good
Yeah,
reminder.
thank you. Uh, so where can people, uh, who can people or contact in case they would like to have more help, guidance, just or just talk? Am I actually seeing what I'm seeing?
Hmm. Yes.
that's I didn't actually prepare anything with that. I should have. That is actually good. There are quite a few, and I don't know if there's national. I'm not sure if there is. What I will do is I will give you um, some information to attach to this that you
Yes.
can, at
Mhm.
least for the States, yeah. And I
Right.
don't know, am I supposed we can do some research for global as well, because I'm sure there must be, right? So
Mhm.
I'm not as familiar abroad. So
And
yeah.
thank you. We will attach that in the notes. And
Yes.
if you are missing anything, and your audience that have made it this far, if you have any questions or are looking for information for your specific case or for your
Mhm.
specific country, feel free to comment or contact us. We will absolutely do what we can to help you in your situation as much as we can, really.
Yes. This podcast and program and platform is for you. And yes, thank you so much, both of you, to allow this dialogue to happen and also break the silence, raise awareness, and help people stuck in that situation feel less alone and actually feel like there's a way out and that they are empowered. So that really gives me comfort, this whole conversation.
Thank you both for this opportunity. It's been really amazing. So I wanna share something with you that I forgot I was gonna do at the beginning. So behind me, I don't actually know if you can see it, but there's a painting here. Can you see the painting?
No,
I
I know.
see the couch I
Yeah,
think we're
there.
sitting.
Oh, I don't see
There's
it.
dandelions on the painting. My grandmother painted
Oh,
that.
great.
So I
Really?
wanted to just, yeah, they're off the side from the sunflowers. Just wanted to share that with you. So,
So
and I
meaningful.
forgot about
Beautiful.
it. Yeah,
Thank
I was
you.
sitting down. I thought, oh, I must
Look at that.
mention that. So there you go. Yeah,
That's
Thank you.
perfect.
right.
So fitting. Yes. Yes.
And we will also include in the notes where people can follow you, Don, or
Mm.
contact you. So that's thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank
and it's been a real pleasure and honor. And I am sure we will see you here on the Dandelion Reflections podcast more often.
I'd love that. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
you. A pleasure meeting you as well, Dawn. Thank you for sharing your story and insights and wisdom with us and dandelions across the globe. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Christopher, for being such a great co-host again.
Yes. And thank you, everyone. And thanks to our audience being with us today. And don't forget, you're stronger than you think, and stronger than other people often make you think.
Yes.
And thanks again, and goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.